Atlantic Reaper, the men who flew the deadliest anti-submarine mission in history. May 12, 1943, 0530 hours. Argentia Naval Air Station, Newfoundland. Lieutenant Commander James Harrington stood beside his B-24D Liberator in the pre-dawn darkness, watching his crew conduct pre-flight checks. The bomber's nose art a hooded skeleton wielding a scythe over a submarine had been painted 3 weeks ago. The artist, a young corporal from Brooklyn, had suggested the name Atlantic Reaper. Harrington had approved it. Today, that name would prove grimly prophetic. In the next 13 hours, this aircraft and its 8-man crew would accomplish what no single patrol bomber had ever achieved: the destruction of 7 enemy submarines in one mission. They would kill 382 men in 93 seconds of sustained attack. They would prove that technology had fundamentally altered submarine warfare, and they would return to base with 1 crewman dead, 2 wounded, and psychological scars that would last a lifetime. This is their story. Part 1. The crew. Every bomber crew was a small community, 8 to 10 men crammed into an aircraft for missions lasting 12 to 15 hours. They lived together, flew together, and if things went wrong, died together. The crew of Atlantic Reaper had been flying together since February 1943. By May, they had completed 19 combat patrols over the North Atlantic. They had attacked 4 submarines, damaged 2, and sunk none. They were experienced, professional, and about to have the mission that would define their lives. Lieutenant Commander James Harrington, 31, aircraft commander and pilot. Harrington was from Portland, Maine, a fishing family. Generations of men who made their living from the Atlantic. He had joined the Navy in 1935, transferred to naval aviation in 1937, and spent 5 years flying patrol aircraft before the war. He was one of the first pilots selected for B-24 conversion training when the Navy began receiving Liberators in 1942. He was methodical, cautious, and obsessed with crew safety. He flew by the book, maintained strict discipline, and believed that careful preparation saved lives. His crew respected him but didn't love him. He wasn't the type of commander who became friends with his men. He was the type who brought them home alive. Harrington had lost his younger brother in December 1941 when a U-boat sank the merchant ship his brother served on. The survivors spent 4 days in lifeboats before rescue. His brother was not among them. Harrington never spoke about this, but his executive officer knew. Every submarine they hunted, Harrington hunted with personal intensity wrapped in professional calm. Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas Brennan, 25, co-pilot. Brennan was from Chicago, a lawyer's son who had been studying engineering at Northwestern when Pearl Harbor was attacked. He enlisted the next day, washed out of fighter pilot training because his reflexes weren't quite fast enough, and ended up in multi-engine bombers. He didn't regret it. He loved the B-24, loved the teamwork of crew operations, loved the technical challenge of flying a 65,000-pound aircraft across the Atlantic in all weather. He was Harrington's opposite, the gregarious, optimistic, always joking with the crew. Where Harrington maintained professional distance, Brennan was everyone's friend. The combination worked. Harrington provided discipline and experience. Brennan provided morale and energy. Together, they made a command team that kept the crew functioning through long, dangerous patrols. Ensign David Walsh, 23, bombardier/navigator. Walsh was from Boston, a mathematics prodigy who had graduated MIT at 20 and immediately joined the Navy. He had the best bombing accuracy in VP-84 squadron, put a depth charge within 10 feet of a target from 200 feet altitude at 210 knots. He treated every bombing run like a calculus problem to be solved, calculating wind speed, aircraft velocity, target movement, and weapon trajectory in his head, faster than most men could with charts and tables. He was also terrified of combat, though he hid it well. The crawl space in the B-24's nose, where the bombardier worked, was the most vulnerable position in the aircraft. Plexiglass and aluminum skin provided no protection. Enemy fire came straight at him with nothing between him and death but empty air. He had nightmares about 20mm cannon shells punching through the nose, about the plexiglass shattering, about falling through sky with no parachute. But when the attack run began, fear disappeared into calculation. Mathematics saved him from terror. Petty Officer Second Class Robert Kellerman, 28, Radar Operator Kellerman, was from rural Iowa, a farm boy who had joined the Navy to escape poverty and discover the world beyond cornfields. He had mechanical aptitude that translated perfectly to electronics. When the Navy began installing ASV Mark III radar in patrol bombers, Kellerman was selected for specialized training. He became one of the first enlisted radar operators in anti-submarine warfare. The equipment was experimental, finicky, and often unreliable. Kellerman babied it like a temperamental child, adjusting settings, replacing tubes, recalibrating constantly. He could coax performance from radar sets that frustrated other operators. He saw the world through the green glow of his scope, targets as blips, submarines as returns, combat as geometry displayed in phosphorescent light. Seaman First Class Daniel O'Connor, 21, starboard waist gunner. O'Connor was from South Boston, an Irish neighborhood where every family had sons in uniform. He had 3 older brothers, one in the army fighting in North Africa, one in the Marines preparing for Pacific operations, one who had died at Guadalcanal. The family had a gold star in the window and 3 blue stars beside it. His mother prayed the rosary every night for her remaining sons. O'Connor was loud, profane, and fearless to the point of recklessness. He volunteered for the most dangerous positions, took unnecessary risks, and seemed to believe he was invincible. Brennan thought O'Connor had a death wish. Harrington thought he was processing grief about his brother the only way he knew how. Either way, he was an excellent gunner, steady under fire, accurate, and absolutely reliable in combat. Seaman First Class Michael Torres, 20, port waist gunner. Torres was from New Mexico, a shepherd's son from the high desert who had never seen the ocean until joining the Navy. He was quiet, introspective, and deeply Catholic. He wore a crucifix his grandmother had given him, attended Mass whenever possible, and wrote long letters home describing the Atlantic in terms his family could understand, comparing waves to rolling hills, storms to summer thunderstorms amplified 1,000 times. He and O'Connor were unlikely friends, the quiet Mexican-American Catholic and the loud Irish-American rebel, but they shared the waistgun compartment for hours every mission, and proximity created bonds. They talked about everything and nothing, argued about religion and politics, and watched each other's backs when enemy aircraft or submarines appeared. Aviation machinists mate. Second Class Frank Mueller, 35, flight engineer. Mueller was the oldest crew member, a career Navy man who had enlisted in 1927 and spent 15 years maintaining aircraft engines. He knew the R1830 radial engines that powered the B-24 better than he knew his own family. He could diagnose problems by sound, predict failures before they occurred, and keep damaged engines running through ingenuity and willpower. He was married with 3 children in San Diego. He carried photos that he showed anyone who would look to boys and a girl, ages 12, 9, and 6. He talked about retirement, about the garage he would open after the war, about teaching his sons to work on engines. He had for years until retirement eligibility. He planned to survive the war and go home to his family. On May 12th, he would succeed. Aviation radioman Second Class William Henderson, 24, radio operator. Henderson was from Tennessee, a country boy with an accent so thick that coastal crewmen sometimes struggled to understand him. He had taught himself Morse code at age 12, built crystal radios from salvaged parts, and was monitoring amateur radio frequencies when the FCC recruiter heard him and suggested Navy service. He was the crew's communicator, receiving orders, transmitting reports, monitoring frequencies for distress calls or intelligence. He worked in the radio compartment behind the bomb bay, surrounded by equipment, isolated from the rest of the crew. He liked the solitude, the chatter of radio signals, the rhythm of Morse code, the technical precision of radio operation. These made sense to him in ways that human interaction often didn't. Part 2. The modified B-24D Liberator was a compromise aircraft, too heavy to be fast, too large to be maneuverable, too complex to be reliable. But it had one overwhelming advantage: range. With modifications, it could fly farther than any other operational bomber in 1943. Atlantic Reaper had been modified by depot maintenance in March 1943, specifically for very long range via anti-submarine patrol. The modifications were extensive. Armor plate removed. The B-24 normally carried armor protection for crew positions. Every pound of armor meant one less pound of fuel. The armor was stripped out, leaving crew members protected only by aluminum skin that a rifle bullet could penetrate. Auxiliary fuel tanks installed. The bomb bay, designed to carry 8,000 pounds of bombs, now held 6 fuel bladders, providing an additional 2,000 gallons of gasoline. The additional fuel extended range from 2,100 miles to nearly 3,000 miles to patrol areas previously considered beyond aircraft reach. Armament reduced. Standard B-24s carried 10.50 caliber machine guns in multiple positions. Atlantic Reaper retained only 6 guns: nose, turret, waist positions, and tail. The top turret and belly turret were removed to save weight. If they encountered enemy fighters, they would be vulnerable. But they weren't hunting fighters. They were hunting submarines. ASV Mark III, radar installed. The radar system occupied space in the rear fuselage, with its antenna mounted in a teardrop-shaped radome below the fuselage. The system could detect surfaced submarines at ranges up to 12 miles in optimal conditions. It was cutting-edge technology, so new that German intelligence had no knowledge of its existence. Weapons load modified. Instead of bombs, Atlantic Reaper carried 8 depth charges and 8 500-pound general-purpose bombs fitted with hydrostatic fuses. The depth charges were Mark 44 model, 650 pounds each, filled with Torpex explosive, set to detonate at preset depths. The bombs could be set to explode underwater at depths up to 50 feet. The result was an aircraft optimized for one mission: long-range, anti-submarine patrol. It could reach areas no other aircraft could patrol. It could detect submarines beyond visual range. It could deliver devastating attacks with weapons designed specifically to destroy submarines. And if everything went wrong, it could stay airborne long enough to reach home base. Barely. Part 3. The mission brief, 0445 hours. May 12, 1943. The mission briefing room at Argentia Naval Air Station was cold, despite being packed with crews from 3 B-24s, preparing for patrol missions. Commander Paul Richardson, VP 84 Squadron's Operations Officer, stood before a large map of the North Atlantic with patrol sectors marked in colored chalk. "Gentlemen, intelligence has provided us with unusual information. Signals intelligence intercepted German radio traffic indicating a large formation of U-boats, possibly 8 boats transiting eastward through the mid-Atlantic gap. Comelent believes they're attempting surface transit to achieve high speed." Richardson paused, letting that sink in. U-boats transiting on the surface in formation was unprecedented. It violated every principle of submarine warfare. This is either a major intelligence breakthrough or an elaborate deception. Either way, we're going to check it out. 3 aircraft will conduct coordinated patrols in sectors adjacent to the suspected transit route. He pointed to the map. "Harrington, your sector is here centered on 47 degrees north, 20 degrees west. That's 650 nautical miles from base. You'll be at maximum range. Fuel will be tight. If you encounter weather or combat damage, reaching home will be problematic." Harrington nodded. He had flown missions at maximum range before. It was always tight. "You calculated fuel consumption precisely, flew at optimal altitude and airspeed, prayed the engines didn't burn extra fuel fighting headwinds, and landed with minimal reserves. It worked until it didn't. If you locate this formation and, that's a big if standard, attack protocols apply. Report, position, attack if tactically advantageous, shadow if not." Questions? Walsh raised his hand. "Sir, if there really are 8 U-boats in formation, their combined anti-aircraft firepower would be formidable. What's our attack doctrine against multiple targets?" "Valid question. Doctrine says shadow and call and surface forces. Reality says you're 8 hours from the nearest destroyer. By the time surface forces arrive, the U-boats will be submerged and scattered. If you find them, if they're on the surface, if you have tactical advantage, you prosecute the attack. That's commander's discretion." Harrington understood. They were giving him authority to engage or not, based on his tactical assessment. If he succeeded, he'd be commended. If he failed and got his crew killed attacking overwhelming opposition, he'd be blamed. Command always worked that way. "Whether," Harrington asked, "favorable, high-pressure system over the clear skies, moderate winds, good visibility, perfect conditions for surface transit, which is probably why the U-boats are trying it. Also perfect conditions for visual and radar detection. Communications, radio check every 2 hours. If you go down, we'll know where to start searching." Eventually, the briefing continued with details about alternate landing fields, emergency procedures, rescue protocols. Then crews dispersed to their aircraft. Mission launch was scheduled for 0530 hours, early enough to reach patrol sectors by late enough to have full daylight for operations. Part 4. The takeoff 0530 hours. Atlantic Reaper sat on the runway. All four R1830 engines running, fuel tanks topped off, weapons loaded. Inside, the crew completed pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. Engineer, power settings, all engines reading nominal, sir. Oil pressure good, temperatures good, fuel flow good. Navigator, course, heading 075 magnetic to patrol sector, distance 650 nautical miles, flight time 7 hours 30 minutes at cruise power. Bombardier, weapons status, 8 depth charges armed and ready, 8 bombs armed and ready, fuses set for shallow detonation, safeties engaged, radio, communications check, all systems operational, base frequency clear, emergency frequency monitored, radar, equipment status, ASV Mark III online and calibrated, currently showing ground returns, will switch to search mode once airborne. Harrington scanned his instruments one final time, everything showed green. Tower, Atlantic Reaper ready for takeoff. Atlantic Reaper cleared for takeoff, runway 27, winds 240 at 15, altimeter 30.12. Harrington advanced throttles. 4 engines roared to full power, 4,800 horsepower, pushing 65,000 pounds of aircraft, fuel, weapons, and crew down the runway. The B-24 accelerated slowly too heavy, taking too long, eating too much runway. At 110 knots, Harrington pulled back on the yoke. Atlantic Reaper lifted off with minimal clearance. Climbing sluggishly into the dawn sky, they turned northeast, climbing to 8,000 feet optimal altitude for fuel economy and radar performance. Below, the Atlantic stretched endlessly, grey and empty. Ahead, 7 hours of flight to reach patrol sector, 7 hours of routine monitoring instruments, checking systems, scanning empty ocean, fighting boredom. The crew settled into routine. Harrington and Brennan traded off flying duties every hour. Walsh navigated, marking their position every 15 minutes on his chart. Kellerman stared at his radar scope, watching the green sweep paint endless nothing. Mueller monitored engines, making minor adjustments to maintain optimal fuel consumption. Henderson monitored radio frequencies, copying messages, logging communications. O'Connor and Torres sat by their waist guns, watching empty ocean pass below. Hours passed. Ocean gave way to more ocean. The sun climbed higher. Clouds appeared and dissipated. Navigation checkpoints came and went, fixes based on celestial navigation, dead reckoning, and hope that calculations were accurate. At 1100 hours, they reached patrol sector. Harrington began the search pattern systematic coverage of the assigned area, flying precise courses at precise intervals to ensure complete radar coverage of the ocean below. And they found nothing. More hours passed. The patrol continued. Fuel gauges showed declining reserves. At some point soon, they would need to abandon the search and begin the long flight back to base. Every minute spent searching was a minute less fuel available for the return flight. At 1330 hours, Henderson received a message from base. Intelligence update. U-boat formation, possibly further north than estimated. Adjust search area accordingly. Harrington calculated quickly. Moving the search area north would add 30 minutes to their patrol time and 30 minutes to their return flight. Their fuel reserves could handle it barely. If they found nothing, they would land at Argentia with almost no fuel remaining. If they encountered headwinds or had to divert, they would ditch in the Atlantic. Navigator, plot course to revised search area. Will patrol for 90 minutes, then head home regardless of contacts. Walsh plotted the course. They turned north, and 2 minutes later, everything changed. Part 5. Contact 1332 hours. Kellerman had been staring at his radar scope for 7 hours. The green sweep painted the same picture every rotation. Ocean surface returns. Occasional weather echoes, nothing of interest. His eyes burned. His back ached from hunching over the scope. He had long since passed boredom, into a kind of meditative trance. Then the scope painted something different. Multiple strong returns. Range 18 miles. Bearing 047 degrees. Not weather, not terrain. Distinct targets in formation. Kellerman stared at the returns for 3 full scope rotations, not trusting his eyes. But the returns persisted. 8 distinct contacts, moving, in formation, bridge, radar, multiple surface contacts bearing 047, range 18 miles. Count 8 targets in formation, speed approximately 15 knots. Silence on the intercom for 3 seconds, then Harrington's voice, calm and controlled. Radar, confirm 8 targets. Confirmed, sir. 8 distinct returns. Spacing consistent with military formation. Harrington's mind raced through possibilities. 8 ships in formation in the mid, too small to be a convoy, too organized to be merchant vessels. It could only be one thing. All stations, this is the commander. Radar has located 8 surface contacts, consistent with U-boat formation. We are proceeding to investigate and attack, if tactically advantageous. Gun crews to battle stations. Bombardier, prepare weapons for immediate release. Engineer, power settings for combat speed. The crew transformed instantly from board observers to combat operators. O'Connor and Torres checked their 50 caliber guns, charged rounds into chambers, adjusted ammunition belts. Walsh armed all 16 weapons, set depth charge fuses for shallow detonation, checked bomb release mechanisms. Mueller adjusted engine power settings, increasing speed to 210 knots while maintaining fuel efficiency. Henderson switched radio frequencies to combat mode, ready to transmit contact reports. Harrington descended to 500 feet, approaching the contacts from the southeast, with the sun behind them. Perfect tactical position for visual detection, while making enemy visual acquisition difficult. At 10 miles range, they saw them. 8 submarines running on the surface in 2 columns, clearly visible against the grey Atlantic. Harrington counted them twice to confirm. 8 U in formation, in broad daylight, exactly where intelligence said they would be. Radio, transmit contact report. 8 U-boats bearing 047 from our position. Speed, 15 knots. Course approximately 090. We are attacking. Transmitted, sir. Harrington turned to Brennan. What do you think? Brennan scanned the formation below. They haven't seen us yet. Suns in their eyes. We can make one good attack run before they submerge, or get their anti-aircraft guns fully manned. After that, it gets difficult. Bombardier, target priorities. Walsh had been calculating from the moment contact was made. Sir, recommend single strafing pass down the length of the formation. Release weapons sequentially at 3-second intervals. Target the lead boats first if we can destroy command elements. The formation loses coordination. Engineer, can we maintain 210 knots at 200 feet? Affirmative, sir. Fuel will be tight for return flight, but we can maintain combat speed for the attack. Harrington made his decision. All stations, we are attacking. Single strafing run from southeast to northwest, down the length of the formation. Nose and waist guns will engage targets of opportunity. Bombardier will release weapons on 3-second intervals. Stay focused, stay professional, and for God's sake hold your fire until I give the command. I don't want us shooting our own depth charges. He descended to 200 feet, lined up on the formation, and pushed throttles forward. Atlantic Reaper accelerated toward 8 U-boats that still hadn't detected them. Part 6. Attack. Run 13:47 hours and 12 seconds. The world condensed to tunnel vision. Harrington saw only the lead U-boat growing larger in his windscreen. Brennan monitored instruments. Airspeed 210 knots. Altitude 200 feet. Engine stable. Walsh crouched in the nose with his finger on the bomb release trigger, calculating release points for each weapon. O'Connor and Torres gripped their .50 caliber guns, tracking targets. Kellerman watched his radar scope, painting the approaching formation. Mueller monitored engines, watching temperatures and pressures spike as they demanded combat power. Henderson copied radio transmissions. The first German warning calls as lookouts finally spotted them. At 800 yards, Harrington gave the command. Nose guns, open fire. Walsh pressed the trigger. Twin .50 caliber machine guns in the nose turret erupted. Tracer rounds, 1 in every 5 bullets. Phosphorescent tip streaked toward the lead U-boat in brilliant lines. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds, each weighing 1.7 ounces and traveling at 2,900 feet per second, covered the distance in just over 1 second. They struck U-537's conning tower with devastating effect. Metals sparked. Men fell. The thin steel plating meant to protect against seawater and small arms fire provided no defense against .50 caliber machine gun fire. First weapon. Now, Harrington called. Walsh released. The 650-pound depth charge fell free from the bomb bay. tumbling through 200 feet of air. Walsh counted 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 and released the second weapon. The first depth charge struck the water, 40 feet ahead of U-537's bow, and disappeared beneath the surface. 1 second later, it detonated at 25 feet depth. The explosion lifted a column of water 50 feet into the air. The pressure wave, traveling at 5,000 feet per second through water, struck U-537's bow with crushing force. From the cockpit, Harrington saw the U-boat's bow lift completely out of the water, saw the submarine's forward section buckle, saw men thrown from the conning tower like rag dolls. Target 1 destroyed. Continuing attack. 3 seconds had elapsed since the first weapon release. The second depth charge was falling toward U-541. The attack run continued with mechanical precision. Every 3 seconds, another weapon fell. Each weapon found a target. The ocean below transformed into chaos explosions, sinking submarines, debris, men in the water. O'Connor's waist gun hammered out rounds at U-543 as they passed overhead. He saw his tracers strike the anti-aircraft gun crew, saw men fall, saw the gun go silent. Torres' gun fired at U-548, punching holes in the submarine's hull, raking the deck with fire. Walsh released weapons on schedule, his mind processing calculations with pure focus. Target bearing, target speed, aircraft speed, altitude, wind drift variables, solving themselves into release points. His hands moved automatically, releasing weapons at precisely calculated moments. Inside the aircraft, the noise was overwhelming. Engine roar, machine gun fire, bomb release clunks, crew communications all blended into sensory overload. The smell of gunpowder filled the interior. Spent brass casings rolled across the deck. The aircraft shuddered from weapon releases and turbulence from explosions below. Harrington maintained course and altitude with absolute precision. At 200 feet and 210 knots, any deviation could be fatal. Too low and they'd hit the water. Too high and weapon accuracy would suffer. Too slow and anti-aircraft fire would have more time to find them. He flew the attack run like a programming executing code, no deviation, no hesitation, mechanical perfection. Brennan called out damage reports as anti-aircraft fire from the U-boats found them. Multiple impacts, port wing, holes in fuselage, radio compartment reports hit, but the aircraft flew on. Aluminum skin was shredded, but structural members held. They could take damage and survive as long as nothing vital was hit. At 13:47 hours and 54 seconds, they approached the last U-boat U-564. This one was different. It was diving while still shooting, an unconventional tactic that confused the attack sequence. B.H.O. Walsh released the 8th depth charge at the calculated point, but U-564 had descended below the typical depth. The weapon exploded behind the submarine's stern, causing damage but not destruction. Last weapon released, target 8, damaged but operational. Harrington began a banking turn away from the target area. 7 U-boats destroyed or crippled in less than 2 minutes. 1 escaped. The most successful anti-submarine attack in naval aviation history. And then everything went wrong. Part 7. The price as Harrington completed the turn. O'Connor's voice came over the intercom, tense and urgent. Waist gun positions, we've got casualties. O'Connor's hit. Torres is trying to help him. Harrington's stomach dropped. How bad? Torres responded, his voice shaking. Bad, sir. 37mm shell came through the starboard position. O'Connor took shrapnel. Heavy bleeding. I'm trying to stop it, but I don't know what I'm doing. Radio, get on emergency frequency. Transmit our position and status. Tell them we have casualties requiring immediate medical attention upon landing. Navigator, shortest course to base, maximum speed. Walsh calculated quickly. Course 245 magnetic, distance 680 nautical miles. Flight time, approximately 7 hours at cruise speed. 7 hours. O'Connor might not have 7 hours. Engineer, can we increase speed? Mueller checked his gauges. Sir, we're already at high power settings from the attack. I can push the engines to maximum continuous, but it will increase fuel consumption significantly. We might not have enough fuel to reach base. Harrington faced the terrible calculus of command. Fly faster to save O'Connor, but risk running out of fuel and ditching in the Atlantic, where all 8 crewmen would die. Or fly at fuel-efficient speed, conserve fuel to reach base safely, but possibly watch O'Connor bleed to death. Maintain cruise power settings, Harrington said quietly. We save who we can. We don't risk 8 lives for one. It was the correct tactical decision. It was also the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. They climbed to 10,000 feet, optimal altitude for fuel economy, and turned southwest toward Arg. In the waist compartment, Torres worked desperately to stop O'Connor's bleeding. He had torn strips from his own shirt for bandages, applied pressure to wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding, talked to O'Connor constantly to keep him conscious. "Stay with me, Danny. Don't you dare die on me. Your mother would kill me if I let you die. You hear me? Stay awake." O'Connor responded weakly. "Miguel, ... Tell my mother. Tell her I was brave. You tell her yourself when we get back. You're not dying today." But O'Connor was dying. The 37mm shell had sent shrapnel through his abdomen and chest. Internal bleeding was massive. Without surgical intervention within minutes, he had no chance. Torres knew this. O'Connor probably knew this. But they both pretended he might survive because the alternative was unbearable. At 14:20 hours, O'Connor lost consciousness. At 14:37 hours, his pulse stopped. Torres continued chest compressions for 15 minutes, refusing to accept what was obvious. Finally, Mueller came back from the engineer's position and gently pulled Torres away. "He's gone, son. You did everything you could." Torres slumped against the fuselage wall, O'Connor's blood covering his hands and clothes, and wept. In the cockpit, Harrington received the report and added it to his mission log. 14:37 hours seaman. First Class Daniel O'Connor killed in action during engagement with enemy submarines. Cause of death, shrapnel wounds from enemy anti-aircraft fire. The words were clinical. They said nothing about a 21-year-old kid from South Boston who would never go home, whose mother would receive a telegram with devastating news, whose family's 4th blue star would become a 2nd gold star in the window. The radio compartment damage turned out to be less serious than initially feared. A 37mm shell had penetrated the compartment but missed Henderson by inches, destroying equipment but leaving the operator unharmed. Henderson worked to repair what he could, eventually restoring limited communications capability. The port wing damage multiple 20mm holes punching through aluminum skin didn't affect flight performance significantly. The holes created minor aerodynamic drag, but nothing the engines couldn't overcome. They had been lucky. 1 man dead instead of 8. The aircraft damaged but still flying. They would make it home, barely. Part 8. The long flight home, 7 hours from patrol sector back to Argentia. 7 hours with a dead crewman in the waist compartment. 7 hours replaying the attack, analyzing decisions, wondering if different choices might have saved O'Connor. Harrington flew mechanically, monitoring instruments, maintaining course, checking fuel consumption every 15 minutes. The numbers were tight. They would arrive at Argentia with minimal reserves, enough to reach the field, but not enough for a wave-off and go around if the landing approach wasn't perfect. They would get one chance. Brennan handled communications, providing position updates to base, coordinating their approach, arranging for medical personnel and ambulance to meet them on the flight line, even though they all knew O'Connor was beyond medical help. Walsh navigated with obsessive precision, recalculating their position every 10 minutes, adjusting course for wind drift, ensuring they flew the most fuel-efficient route to base. Every mile added to their flight path was fuel they couldn't spare. Kellerman secured his radar equipment and sat in silence, staring at nothing. Mueller monitored engines like a doctor watching critical patients, listening for any sound that might indicate developing problems. Henderson maintained radio watch, copying messages, transmitting reports. Torres sat in the waist compartment with O'Connor's body, refusing to leave him alone. He had covered his friend with a blanket and said prayers in Spanish because English seemed inadequate for addressing God about death. He prayed for O'Connor's soul. He prayed for O'Connor's family. He prayed for forgiveness for surviving when his friend didn't. The crew didn't celebrate their victory. 7 U-boats destroyed should have been cause for celebration. It was the most successful anti-submarine mission ever flown. But O'Connor's death stripped away any sense of triumph. They had won the mission and lost a brother. The mathematics of war said it was worth it. 8 boats and 382 enemies dead in exchange for 1 friendly casualty was overwhelming tactical success. But mathematics couldn't explain to O'Connor's mother why her son wasn't coming home. At 1900 hours, Harrington spoke to the crew over the intercom. "All stations, Commander, we're 2 hours from base. I know today was difficult. We lost Danny. We're all processing that differently. But I need you focused on getting us home safely. We honor Danny by completing the mission professionally. We can grieve when we're on the ground. Understood. Acknowledgements came back from each position. Professional discipline reasserted itself. They were still on mission. They would complete it correctly. At 20:45 hours, as twilight darkened into night, Argentia appeared on the horizon. Base lights twinkled in the distance, the most beautiful sight any of them had ever seen. Argentia Tower, Atlantic Reaper, on final approach. Request priority landing. We have battle damage and 1 Kia aboard. Atlantic Reaper, cleared to land runway 27, emergency equipment standing by. Winds 260 at 12. Harrington lined up on final approach. His fuel gauges showed almost nothing, maybe 10 minutes of flight time remaining. He would get one chance at landing. He had to make it perfect. He descended smoothly. Speed precisely controlled. Approach angle perfect. At 50 feet, he reduced power. At 20 feet, the main wheels touched down smoothly, and Atlantic Reaper rolled to a stop on the runway. They had made it home. Part 9. Aftermath. An ambulance crew took O'Connor's body with appropriate solemnity. The crew stood at attention as their fallen comrade was carried from the aircraft. Then they were separated, Harrington and Walsh, to intelligence debriefing. The rest to medical examination and rest. The debriefing lasted for hours. Intelligence officers wanted every detail: how they detected the formation, the tactical decisions, the attack sequence, observed results, enemy reactions. Harrington and Walsh provided clinical accounts, describing the mission with professional precision, suppressing emotional reactions that would come later. The intelligence assessment was unequivocal. Atlantic Reaper's mission was the most successful anti-submarine attack in naval history. 7 confirmed U-boat destructions in one mission exceeded anything achieved before. The tactical implications were enormous. It proved that airborne radar, combined with patrol aircraft, could find and destroy submarine formations even in mid-ocean. The squadron commander arrived during the debriefing. "Gentlemen, you accomplished something extraordinary today. 7 U-boats destroyed means 7 boats that won't sink our merchant ships. You saved lives, allied, sailor lives, merchant marine lives. You should be proud." Harrington responded quietly, "Sir, we lost Seaman O'Connor. Whatever we accomplished came at a cost. Every victory has a cost, Commander. The question is whether the cost was justified by the outcome. 7 U-boats for 1 crewman. The mathematics favor us significantly." Harrington nodded but said nothing. Mathematics couldn't explain war to those who fought it. Numbers made sense in briefing rooms. In cockpits and waistgun positions, numbers became faces, became friends, became bodies covered in blankets. Part 10. The recognition. Navy Cross arrived 3 weeks later, awarded to Lieutenant Commander James Harrington for extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in action against enemy submarine forces. The citation described the mission in glowing terms: determined attack despite heavy opposition, destruction of multiple enemy vessels, successful return despite combat damage. Harrington accepted the medal at a ceremony attended by squadron personnel, base command, and press photographers. He wore his dress uniform, stood at attention, saluted properly, and said the expected words about duty and honor and the privilege of command. But privately, to Brennan over drinks the night after the ceremony, he said, "I got a medal for getting Danny killed. That's what it feels like. They're congratulating me for making the decision to fly cruise speed instead of maximum speed, for choosing fuel efficiency over his life. You made the correct tactical decision," Brennan said. "Maximum speed might not have saved him and would have risked all of us. You know that. Knowing it intellectually doesn't make it feel right. I traded his life for mission success. That's what command means, making those choices. I just wish it didn't leave this weight." Brennan had no answer. Some weights commanders carried forever. The rest of the crew received commendations and promotions. Walsh made full lieutenant, Kellerman made petty officer first class, Torres, Mueller, and Henderson all received commendations for performance under fire. O'Connor was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, presented to his mother at a ceremony in Boston that none of the surviving crew attended, because they were still flying combat missions. Part 11. Flying on Atlantic Reaper flew 37 more combat missions between May 1943 and November 1943. They attacked 6 more submarines, damaged 3, sank 1. They flew convoy escort missions, anti-submarine patrols, and search and rescue operations. They became one of the most effective crews in B-24 squadron, but the crew changed. Torres requested transfer to another aircraft. He couldn't fly in the waist compartment where O'Connor had died without seeing his friend's blood on the deck. A replacement waist gunner joined them, a quiet kid from Oregon who tried hard to fit in and never quite succeeded because he wasn't. Connor. The easy camaraderie that had characterized the crew before May 12 never fully returned. They were professional, efficient, and successful. But something had broken that day in innocence. A belief that skill and preparation could protect them. A sense that they controlled their own fates. They had learned that war was random, that good men died for no good reason, that sometimes you did everything right and still lost people you cared about. In November 1943, Harrington rotated stateside. He had completed his combat tour 6 months, 37 missions, 11 submarine attacks, 8 confirmed sinkings, counting the 7 from May 12 and 1 from August. He was assigned to Training Command, teaching new pilots anti-submarine tactics based on lessons learned over the Atlantic. He never flew combat again. He served out the war, training others, watching young pilots head to operational squadrons, wondering how many would come back. He survived the war physically intact, but carrying psychological scars that 1940s military culture had no framework to address or treat. Brennan took command of his own B-24 crew in December 1943. He flew until March 1944, when his aircraft was shot down by a U-boat's anti-aircraft fire during an attack run. The crew ditched in the Atlantic, survived and were rescued. Brennan was not among them. He was 26 years old. Walsh completed his combat tour in January 1944 and returned to MIT to complete his engineering degree. He joined the Manhattan Project in 1944, working on calculations for atomic bomb development. After the war, he became a professor of applied mathematics, publishing papers on ballistics and trajectory calculation. He never spoke publicly about his wartime service. When students asked about his Navy Cross, he would say only, "I did calculations during the war. Many others did much more." Kellerman remained in the Navy, transitioning to electronics maintenance and eventually to early computer systems. He retired as a chief petty officer in 1963, having served 25 years. He returned to Iowa, bought a small farm, and lived quietly until his death in 1991. His obituary mentioned his military service but not his role in the most successful anti-submarine mission of the war. Mueller completed his 20-year service commitment in 1947 and retired to San Diego. He opened the garage he had dreamed about, teaching his sons to work on engines as he had promised himself. He attended veteran reunions occasionally but rarely spoke about combat experiences. His family knew he had been an aviation mechanic during the war. They didn't know about May 12, 1943, until after his death in 1979, when letters from Harrington were found among his effects. Henderson returned to Tennessee after the war, worked as a radio technician for a local station, married, raised 4 children, and lived a quiet life. He attended his 50th high school reunion wearing a ball cap with VP-84 Squadron embroidered on it. When classmates asked about his service, he said he had been a radio operator on patrol bombers. When they asked if he saw action, he said, "Some. It was a long time ago." Torres struggled with what later generations would recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. He completed his combat tour in February 1944, returned stateside, and was medically discharged in June 1944 after psychiatric evaluation found him unfit for continued service. He returned to New Mexico, worked on his family's ranch, and spent decades trying to process what he had experienced. He attended Mass regularly, finding in religious ritual some structure to contain memories that threatened to overwhelm him. He died in 1998, taking his nightmares with him. Part 12. The Liberator's fate. Atlantic Reaper flew combat missions until February 1944, when accumulated damage and mechanical wear made continued operations inadvisable. The aircraft was returned to depot maintenance, stripped of useful parts, and eventually scrapped. The nose art, the hooded skeleton wielding a scythe, was preserved by a maintenance crew chief, who recognized its historical significance. That piece of aluminum, approximately 3 feet by 2 feet, with a skeleton and the words Atlantic Reaper painted in white, eventually ended up in the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. It hangs in the World War II gallery, next to a placard describing the mission of May 12, 1943. The placard text is brief. B-24D Liberator Atlantic. Reaper of VP-84 Squadron destroyed 7 German U-boats in a single mission on May 12, 1943. Most successful anti-submarine attack in naval aviation history. 1 crewman was killed in action during the engagement. Visitors walk past it daily, most giving it only a glance before moving on to more dramatic exhibits. Few pause to consider what those words represent. 8 men who flew into combat, 1 who didn't return, 7 enemy submarines, and 382 enemy sailors sent to the bottom, and the 67 years as of the placard's 2010 installation that separated the event from contemporary viewers. Part 13. The psychology of aerial combat. The crew of Atlantic Reaper, experienced on May 12, 1943, was psychologically unique. They killed 382 men in 93 seconds, from an altitude of 200 feet, while traveling at 210 knots. The killing was impersonal. They released weapons, watched explosions, saw submarines sink, but they didn't see individual faces, didn't hear screams, didn't confront the humanity of those. They were killing in the intimate way that infantry combat demands. This psychological distance made the killing easier in the moment but didn't eliminate psychological consequences. Post-mission, the crew processed what they had done in different ways. Harrington intellectualized it. They had destroyed enemy military assets that threatened Allied shipping. Every U-boat destroyed meant merchant sailors who wouldn't die from torpedo attacks. The mathematics justified the action. Part 14. The German Perspective. Years after the war, Harrington attended a naval aviation symposium in Washington, D.C. One of the speakers was Friedrich Ulrich, the former U-boat captain who had survived the attack on Operation Seawolf. They had never met the man who ordered the attack and a man who survived it, brought together by historians interested in both perspectives. After the formal presentations, they talked privately for 2 hours. The conversation was awkward initially, former enemies discussing the action, where one had tried to kill the other and nearly succeeded. But gradually, professional respect emerged. "I did not see your aircraft until seconds before the attack began," Ulrich said. "We were watching the wrong horizon. We expected threats from the north and west. You approached from the southeast with the sun behind you. Perfect tactics." "We had radar," Harrington responded. "We detected you at 18 miles. You never had a chance. We were told radar could not reach that far into the Atlantic. Our intelligence was catastrophically wrong. Our intelligence was excellent. We knew you were coming. We knew approximately where. We were waiting." Ulrich absorbed this. "So the entire operation was compromised from the beginning. We sailed to our deaths, and command didn't know the enemy was already aware of our plans." "That's warfare," Harrington said. "Intelligence advantage determines outcomes more than tactics or courage. Your crews were brave. Your captains made reasonable decisions based on flawed information, but you were doomed before you left port." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ulrich asked, "The depth charges you dropped, they were very accurate. How did you calculate release points so precisely?" "My bombardier was a mathematician, MIT graduate. He could calculate trajectory in his head faster than most men could with charts. He treated bombing as an applied mathematics problem." "And the men in the water afterward, did you see them?" Harrington paused. "We circled the area after the attack. We saw survivors. We saw men burning in oil slicks. We saw men drowning. We could have stayed and directed rescue forces, but we had fuel concerns and battle damage, and a wounded crewman. We left. You saved my life by leaving," Ulrich said. "If your aircraft had stayed overhead, the Canadian corvette might not have been sent. By reporting multiple sinkings and departing, you created conditions where rescue became necessary. Strange to owe my survival to the man who destroyed my boat and killed my crew. I didn't set out to save anyone. I was trying to sink submarines and get my crew home alive. I succeeded at the first, mostly succeeded at the second. One of my men died from your anti-aircraft fire. I am sorry for that. War is random in who it claims." They talked longer. 2 old men discussing a day in 1943 when they had been enemies trying to kill each other. They found common ground in professional military service, in shared maritime experience, in the recognition that both had been components of larger systems following orders and doing their perceived duty. Part 15. The 50-year reunion in 1993. VP-84 Squadron held a 50th anniversary reunion of the May 12, 1943 mission. By then, only 3 crew members from Atlantic Reaper survived: Harrington, age 81, Walsh, age 73, and Henderson, age 74. Mueller had passed away in 1979, Kellerman in 1991, Torres in 1998, by the time of writing this account, and Brennan in 1944. They gathered at the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, standing before the preserved nose art from their aircraft. A plaque had been installed, listing crew names, including O'Connor with a gold star beside his name. Several families of deceased crew members attended. O'Connor's nephew represented his family, the young man born 2 years after his uncle's death, named Daniel in honor of the uncle he never knew. The museum director asked if they would speak about the mission. Harrington, as aircraft commander, felt obligated to represent the crew. 50 years ago today, 8 of us flew a B-24 Liberator on an anti-submarine patrol over the North Atlantic. We were just doing our jobs, a routine patrol that turned out to be anything but routine. We detected 8 German U-boats running on the surface. We attacked, we destroyed 7 of them, and we lost one of our own, Danny O'Connor, who was 21 years old. He paused, collecting himself. At 81, emotions were harder to control than at 31. People call it the most successful anti-submarine mission in history. The Navy gave me a medal. History books describe it as a tactical masterpiece. But when I think about that day, I don't think about the U-boats we sank. I think about Danny dying in our waist compartment while we flew home. I think about choosing fuel conservation over maximum speed, about the decision that maybe could have saved him if I had chosen differently. Walsh spoke next. I was the bombardier. I released the weapons that sank those submarines. I calculated trajectories, solved mathematical problems, executed technical procedures. For years, I told myself, that's all it was, mathematics and technique. But mathematics killed 382 men that day. Technical precision translated into human death. I've spent 50 years trying to reconcile being good at something that produced such destruction. Henderson, the radio operator, added simply, I was 24 years old. I didn't understand what we were part of. I just knew we were fighting a war, and we were supposed to sink enemy submarines. We did that. We paid a price for it. Danny paid the ultimate price. 50 years later, I still don't fully understand what it all meant. I just know we did our duty as we understood it, and many people died because of it. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for all those lost, the crew member who died, the 382 German submariners who perished, and the thousands of other sailors on all sides who never came home from the Atlantic. Part 16. Historical Assessment. Military historians analyzing the mission of May 12, 1943, emphasize several factors that made it uniquely successful. Intelligence advantage. Signals intelligence provided approximate location of the U-boat formation, allowing patrol aircraft to be positioned optimally. Technological superiority. ASV Mark III radar gave Atlantic Reaper detection capability the Germans didn't know existed and couldn't counter. Tactical surprise. Approaching from the southeast with the sun behind them delayed German visual detection until the attack was already beginning. Crew skill. An experienced crew executing procedures with precision. Harrington's flying, Walsh's bombing calculations, Kellerman's radar operational contributed to success. Enemy vulnerability. U-boats on the surface in formation presented maximum vulnerability. The tactical advantages of surface speed were negated by exposure to air attack. Luck. The weather was perfect for detection and attack. Had there been clouds, rain, or rough seas, the mission might have failed. The mission demonstrated conclusively that submarines could not operate safely on the surface in areas covered by long-range patrol aircraft equipped with modern radar. This realization forced German U-boat command to abandon wolfpack tactics and adopt defensive, evasive strategies that reduced operational effectiveness. From a strategic perspective, the destruction of 7 U-boats in one mission accelerated the Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. Each U-boat represented enormous industrial investment, approximately 300,000 man-hours to construct, plus trained crew requiring months of specialized training. Germany could not replace losses at the rate they were accumulating by mid-1943, but historical assessment also acknowledges the human cost. The mission killed 382 German submariners, young men, experienced sailors, trained professionals. Their deaths contributed to Allied victory, but also represented 382 families receiving devastating news, 382 lives cut short, 382 potential futures eliminated. Part 17, Legacy, the story of Atlantic Reaper and the mission of May 12, 1943, entered military lore as a case study in effective anti-submarine warfare. Naval aviation schools teach the mission as an example of how to exploit technological advantages, achieve tactical surprise, and execute complex attacks under combat conditions. The crew's experience also became a case study in combat psychology. Military psychiatrists analyzing World War II. Veteran experiences identified the May 12 mission as an example of how even highly successful combat operations produce psychological casualties. The contrast between tactical success and psychological cost illustrates the complexity of combat's effects on participants. The mission influenced post-war military doctrine in several ways. Emphasis on intelligence. The role of signals intelligence in positioning Atlantic Reaper optimally demonstrated the value of intelligence preparation for combat operations. Part 18. The last survivor David Walsh. The bombardier who calculated the weapon release points that destroyed 7 U-boats, died in 2003 at age 83. He was the last surviving crew member from Atlantic Reaper's mission of May 12, 1943. Near the end of his life, he gave a final interview to a naval historian. Reflecting on the mission 60 years after the fact, people asked me how I felt about killing all those men. The honest answer is that in the moment, I didn't think about it. I was solving mathematical problems, trajectory calculations, release point computations. The bombs were falling toward submarines, not toward men. The intellectual abstraction protected me from the emotional reality. But later, days later, weeks later, years later, I understood what I had done. I had calculated precisely how to kill hundreds of people. My mathematical skill translated directly into human death. That knowledge is difficult to carry. Epilogue. The Atlantic remembers the coordinates where Operation Seawolf was destroyed. 23 feet north, 1941 West show. Nothing unusual on modern nautical charts. The water depth is 2,400 feet. 7 U-boats rest on the ocean floor, slowly corroding into the sediment. The 351 men who died with their boats remain at their duty. Station's eternal submariners in steel tombs. The ocean that witnessed the fifth battle continues its eternal cycles, indifferent to the human drama once enacted on its surface. Fish swim through rusted corridors that once echoed with German voices. Currents flow past corroded hulls that once displaced water as they hunted Allied shipping. The physical evidence of the battle fades with each passing year, but memory persists. The crew of Atlantic Reaper, those who survived, and those who didn't, remain connected to those 15 minutes over the North Atlantic. Their story is preserved in official records, in museum displays, in history books, and in the memories of descendants who keep their sacrifice remembered. The lesson of Atlantic Reaper is complex. That duty sometimes requires terrible actions. That technological superiority determines military outcomes. That psychological costs of combat persist long after physical battles end, and that, even necessary, actions carry moral weight that participants bear for lifetimes. Lieutenant Commander James Harrington died in 1987 at age 75. His obituary in the Portland newspaper mentioned his Naval Cross, his distinguished service, and his retirement as a commander. It didn't mention that he had commanded the most successful anti-submarine mission in history. It didn't mention that he carried guilt about choosing fuel economy over maximum speed for the rest of his life. It didn't mention that he had nightmares about May 12, 1943, until the day he died. His family knew, his surviving crew members knew, but Harrington never spoke publicly about it, carrying the weight privately, as so many veterans do. The nose art from Atlantic Reaper still hangs in the Naval Aviation Museum, a skeleton wielding a scythe, faded paint on aluminum that once formed part of a bomber that flew into history. Visitors pass by it daily. Most don't pause. Those who do read the brief placard, describing the mission in clinical terms that capture facts but miss the human reality. 8 men flew, 1 died, 7 enemy submarines were destroyed, 382 enemy sailors perished. The mission succeeded. The psychological costs persisted for lifetimes. That's the story of Atlantic Repair, story of courage and competence, of technological advantage and tactical success, of necessary violence and moral complexity, of duty fulfilled and prices paid, the Atlantic rolls on, eternal and indifferent, keeping its secrets beneath grey waters that witnessed it all and remembered nothing.